Okay, so I'm going to record it in here, and then I will put it up into Panopto, if that's okay. Because I don't trust Panopto. I mean, so mean, it's a nice application, but anyways, so it would be useful if actually I'm able to see that myself. So, okay. I'm going to be talking about my passion, and my passion is comes from the following situation. Okay, so we all know that the knowledge that you guys implement in the clinic is based on decades of experiment, is based on scientific discoveries and a very long tradition of many scientists experimenting and so on. And it's good, right? You know, we've been able to understand, for instance, the molecular basis of type 2 diabetes. We've been able to understand very well, for instance, how the heart works. The problem is that that particular understanding has actually performed by usually northern white wealthy European men, right? So people like me. That's not to say that, well, I'm Southern European. That's not to say that, sorry? That's not to say that they were, you know, trying to ostracize or trying to, I'm not going to blame them. You know, where is the money, right? Where the money is where you do research, right? You have to have the proper infrastructure. You have to have not just even the infrastructure, but the institutions that this country, the United Kingdom, has had for centuries, you know, where things work here. Yeah? When I'm here, you know, people complain about the NHS, about, you know, about it works, you know, okay, whatever, but go somewhere else. You see. I'm not saying, you know, we all understand that the system is broken, but can we also look at the, you know, half full part of the glass, right? So, but the problem is that all of that knowledge that we've accumulated basically is representative of around 20% of the global population. Yeah, let's say European. Now, that works up to an extent, right? It works to an extent. You know, many people, everyone receives healthcare. You know, the progression of life expectancy has augmented significantly everywhere in the world, but it is not. It's not necessarily equal for everybody else who is not. And particularly if we talk about genomics or genetics, which is heavily influenced by your ancestry. We know, for instance, that if you are of a particular type of ancestry, let's say African ancestry, right? We know that, have you heard of something called pharmacogenomics? Which is the ability for a person to metabolize a particular drug based on the genes that encode for the specific enzymes that then metabolize the drug, right? And we all know coding, right? Coding. You all know coding, right? So coding, as it happens, 7% of the global population is intolerant. And the levels of intolerance are actually different depending on what ancestry you've got. So we know for instance, have you heard of another drug called warfarin, right? You know warfarin, the most prescribed anticoagulant in the world, right? So 1 out of 4 African ancestry people have adverse drug reactions. Yeah. The most prescribed drugs in the world, Abilify and some others, somewhere between 25% to 33% of all people who are receiving those drugs are actually benefiting. The rest are either nothing or even having adverse drug reactions. And I'm talking specifically about pharmacogenomics because contrary to most diseases, most of the conditions that you know have a significant genomic contribution in terms of risk, we know that pharmacogenomics affects everyone, right? The genomics is very good, particularly for diagnosing rare genomic disorders, congenital diseases, but this is maybe around 6% of the population. And it works, and if you have that information, even if you don't have a treatment, just the fact that you can put a label and you can diagnose what's wrong with that patient, it makes a massive difference, right? Because then you can have palliative care and so on. But that only affects around 6% of the global, of people who have no rare genomic disorders. So, but pharmacogenomics, that's something that affects us all, because the relationships between drug and genes metabolizations are very well established. But the problem is that the guidelines that we all have for prescriptions are based on Northern West European populations. And that has tremendous implications in terms of the further genetically you are from this particular ancestry, the less accurate the dosage specifications are going to be, okay? And that's one of the things I want to talk about today. So another thing that I've been working on, are you all using ChatGPT? All of you? Is there anyone who hasn't used ChatGPT? That's it. No, none. You haven't used it. That's okay. I mean, you are an NHS person, right? So I mean, I don't care whether you use it or not. I care whether you take care of me, right? So I mean, that said, so let me just give you a very, very, very brief introduction of the ChatGPT moment, right? So November 2022, OpenAI, which is the company that released ChatGPT, released this sort of research product, and then suddenly, like in a few months' time, you have hundreds of users using it because somehow it was able to talk, and it made sense. And all of the previous assumptions of understanding language, you remember that you are all old enough like me to remember when you were trying to do translations using Google, how shitty they were, right? And then, but suddenly, now they can talk to you in English, Spanish, Mandarin. It doesn't matter. It understands the nuance of language. And all that comes because of 3 things. The volume of data that companies like OpenAI or Google, Gemini, or Anthropic, Claude, they've sort of screen and scout the whole of the internet for data, grabbing all the text, everything that we know, Wikipedia, Reddit, everything, and you feed it. So you could imagine is some of those models right now, they have been trained and I'll go a little bit further into what training means, but it's basically you have like an underlying mathematical model that is able to understand relationships, hidden relationships, not in a sequential manner, but in a sort of context from different bits of texts. Yeah, I'm not gonna go further into that, but let's just say that we have now a mathematical model called Transformer, was published in 2017, that is able to understand the nuances and the long relationships, not just within the same sentence, but within different texts, and the sort of meaning nuances that can now be sort of encoded into a massive mathematical model. So that's really what lies at the core of all of these chatbots. Yeah, it's just a massive mathematical model that's being fed with trillions of words. And those words have been processed in a way whereby you can represent in a very sort of highly dimensional, just in a very sort of mathematical way, the relationships between words. What does this mean? So it means that, for instance, if you are talking about cardiovascular disease or coronary artery disease, it's different words, but the mathematical models, well, they are close. They're close in meaning compared to inflammatory bowel disease. Inflammatory bowel disease is still close compared to dog or house or England. So if you could imagine, the 500,000 words of the English language, all like a mathematical cloud with all of the relationships between them mapped. That's what ChatGPT is. Now, and all of those. But what happens with AI is that AI is you may love it or hate it, okay? But AI is a very powerful tool, right? We all agree on that. It's a very powerful tool. What happens if the body of the health knowledge with which it has been trained is reflecting 20% of the global population, and you have thousands of populations which are completely invisible? Yeah, what happens? What happens? It's going to be so. Yeah, so part of my research is, you've heard about the fact that it gives you hallucinations sometimes. You know this thing that sometimes, have you heard of hallucinations? So basically, the ChatGPTs of the world have been developed in a sycophantic way to produce the most likely response knowledge that someone would expect from the general knowledge based on the prompt that you've added, right? So it's going to try and guess what the most likely expected answer should be. That's really what chatbots are. It's just it's mathematics based on this cloud, I said, that knows the relationships between the different words. It's able to weigh what words are important in the prompt, that the ones that have the meaning, and it doesn't matter if they are synonyms. It really has a semantic, perhaps understanding is the wrong word, a semantic appreciation of the words that you fit it in, because it has been pre-trained with trillions of words from the existing literature, right? So
When you give them those prompts, do they say something? Let's say, I want to know.
They don't say that, but I'm sure it's somewhere in the Pentagon stored. I'm sure of that.
Good idea not to share the pitch.
It's like everything that you put on the internet, yeah?
Yeah.
If like last time, what was I looking for? I don't know, trips to Malaga. And then in my Facebook, they have hotels offers it suddenly, and then you go somewhere else in Google, you have like, all of these things. So you can't assume, Mark Zuckerberg already said that a decade ago, forget about privacy. They say privacy is the most important thing, but actually that's a complete BS from my perspective anyway. Right, stop distracting me. I was supposed to give you some. I don't know what the heck I'm going to teach you today, honestly.
We're stuck on second slide.
But anyway, now, hopefully this nobody has explained to you this before in this way. No? Good. Good. So now you can understand what's behind it. Yeah, it's maths. Clever maths. That's one thing. Loads and loads and loads and loads and loads of data. 3, compute. Compute. And I don't mean a supercomputer, okay? I mean a whole building like this, filled with GPUs, they call it. Chips, it's data centers, it's like a factory, yeah? Have you heard of this thing about data centers? And that is the infrastructure of AI. Data centers. Yeah, that's the thing that Trump cares about. That's the thing that Iran is bombing in UAE. Yeah, data centers. They are the brains of the future, or even the present. And they are like undescript factory-like buildings that consume the equivalent of energy of a city. Yeah, and require a huge amount of water to cool them down. Yeah, they're able to deplete even rivers in terms of the amount of how hungry for water and energy they are. But that's a conversation for another day. What I want to say, so we have these 3 ingredients: massive data, we have the mathematical models, and then you have the compute. But then the other important thing is that have you heard of this? I'm sure I haven't told you about the story of my sausage machine. Do you like sausages?
Yeah, we stick to the list here.
Yes, sausage machine.
There's a purpose for my sausage machine. I promise. The sausage machine. Do you like sausages? Right. So I've got a friend that spent £50,000 in this amazing sausage machine, and he was gonna, he put all his savings, mortgage his house, to buy this amazing sausage machine. But then, and he started making sausages, and guess what type of meat he was putting into? He was putting offal. Yeah, he's putting all this, crap meat into it. So what do you think it happens when you put, you have the best sausage machine in the world, but you're putting crap meat into there? What type of sausages are you going to have? Right. So what do you think happens when you have this massive engine? Yeah, this billion AI models that has been fed with partial medical data. What are you getting behind it? Is that a representation? Is that fair representation of the type of biomedical knowledge, do you think? You get it now? I think it was important. The sausage machine. So that's the thing, and that's my struggle. Yeah, we can't have, everything's about equity, diversity, and inclusion. Yeah, we're all trying to be as equal as possible. But if our model from which we derive our diagnosis, our treatments, is partial, then the type of outputs, care we're going to have, potentially is going to be partial. Yeah. And why is it partial? Because we all share 99% of our genomes. We're all identical. We're all Africans, actually. We're all Africans. We all come from Africa. We're all the same species. If we weren't the same species, we couldn't have children together. We can't have children. We are the same human species. So I think I lost my train of thought there, but yeah, so the data quality and the data invisibility is paramount for understanding of yeah.
So you talked about representation of understanding what we feed in is what we get.
Yeah.
So do you think in the future that, for example, China or India or Africa, African countries like South Africa or South American countries, Brazil, they have their own version of AI, and then do you think there's a possibility for them to talk to each other and generate a real representation of global, or we could go with ChatGPT?
That's the goal, right? That's the goal. Yeah. That should be it. That should be our target. A United Nations of healthcare. I mean, we have it. The World Health Organization. I'm going to be talking about the World Health Organization. So, coming back to the hallucinations. So the ChatGPTs and the Geminis and all of those, they've been trained to give beautiful answers. You can ask. You can ask it, what did I eat for breakfast? It doesn't know, but it's going to tell you, you ate an omelette, right? It's going to make it up. It's going to sound as if it was so real because the language is beautifully crafted. That's a hallucination. You can't, especially numbers, citations, figures. It's not a parrot, because there's reasoning behind it, but you can't trust anything. It will help you. But the numbers, watch out the numbers, the statistics, the methods. You can make methods up, and it sounds so beautiful and sounds slick. And if you are not an expert, you will believe it and you think it's correct. So those are hallucinations. Coming back to this, so these are two studies that I have mentioned that I've been working on, and so we downloaded. Have you heard of this database called PubMed?
Yes.
So PubMed is the global repository for biomedical research. If you have anything you want to research on, that's the place you want to look at, right? So it contains any bona fide biomedical research, right? So I took the global burden of disease, World Health Organization. Have you heard of the global burden of disease? So the global burden of disease, you can check. I mean, it's been published in The Lancet, I think. It's a sort of study where it basically looks every single country and all of the main World Health Organization diseases. So we have, let's say, 175 different World Health Organization diseases. Yeah, categories. It includes all of the ones, all of the major ones, right? You know, from diabetes, cancer, leishmaniasis, Ebola, COVID, you know, the main disease categories. And so I basically queried all of these 175 disease priorities. They are diseases priorities by the World Health Organization. And I queried the PubMed for any literature related to any of these 175 diseases. And I get, you know, for type 2 diabetes, I might get 100,000 papers. For leishmaniasis, I might get 100 papers. And that is the body of knowledge that is accessible and visible to the biomedical research community, but also large language models. And what we found is that there's a correlation between the amount of published research for a particular of any of those 175 diseases and the amount of hallucination. The less research, more hallucination. And we're able to quantify that because we benchmarked all of the main, we call it frontier models, you know, the ChatGPTs. I'm not going to tell you the names. You'll know the names, at least one of them, right? So, but the problem is that it's not just the fact that our understanding is going to be less rich for underserved population, underserved diseases, which, by the way, are the main diseases that people die of in 1.5 billion of the global population, yeah, from the global south. You know, malaria, tuberculosis, diarrhea. There's a huge amount of people still dying out of those diseases, and yet most of the research finance output, research output, and clinical trials focus on diseases which are different from the World Health Organization priorities. So,
is it possible to turn off hallucinations, or is it?
Sorry?
Is it possible to turn off hallucinations, or is it not able to calculate how accurate the information is giving you? It's just part of
well, it's not possible to turn off the hallucinations. It's because, as I said, it's kind of inferring. And that's the keyword in the, you know, ChatGPT's from the prompt that you give it and the pre-trained data that it has, it's inferring the most likely answer.
So it's not able to know.
No,
this is what we got.
The model doesn't know anything. It's only sort of executing the mathematical encoding of all these millions, trillions of relationships, incredibly fast computation, you know, a little bit like your neurons. So if you could imagine, you know, I don't know, you're in Russia and you've had this propaganda and you've been taught this particular way of thinking, or you haven't been, so it's kind of like that. You believe.
Feed it good quality data initially.
Say that again?
The only way to reduce or turn off hallucinations is to provide it with good quality data, foundational data.
Yeah.
Or is that not really how it?
I would expect, so that's one of the things I'm trying to understand. So how do we bridge that? So I would say, I speculate that yes, but it's not just that, you know, it's, so you also have the situation where if you give it a lot of data, which is irrelevant, it's going to give you garbage as well. So it's, and the thing is that because this thing is so new, even the providers, they have no idea of, I mean, they will never have, they don't have the understanding to really comprehend all of the possible ramifications. They're giving you a model, they've given you some guardrails, you know, and that was quite interesting because I was using some models, let's say ChatGPT 5.3. I queried for Ebola and typhus and some others, which are among the 175 World Health Organization diseases. And it gave me answers. But there's another one called Claude, Opus 4.5, which is, in my opinion, the most advanced one, is the one I use all the time. And he said, sorry, I can't give you any information about that. I was like, wow.
I prefer that. That gives you more trusted, doesn't it?
So there's some anonymous software developer in San Francisco who's decided that to keep them out of trouble, the best thing is for any kind of query indiscriminately, regardless of whether you're a bona fide researcher or not, that I'm not going to give you anything on Ebola.
Because it can't judge how accurate it is.
No, because bioterrorism.
Oh, right. Oh, okay. Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the Wild West world we are all in, regardless of whether you're using it or not. You know why? Because all of the clinicians, if they're not yet, they will use this technology. And they are using it in Africa. They are using it in places, not knowing the caveats, these caveats. Why do they not know it? Because this is pure research. Nobody even has thought about that yet. Okay? And the other point I want to say is that it self-reinforces the circle. So you have, let's say, for diseases from the global south, which are neglected, they tend to be, the language is more disconnected from the main body of knowledge. Yeah, like the ischemic strokes of the type 2 diabetes, the inflammatory bowel diseases, the cancers. They are very, very well studied research. You have a lot of body. And guess what? Those diseases benefit from neighboring research areas a lot more from those diseases whose language is disconnected, whose semantic similarity to the mainstream of knowledge is further. And that's another thing that we are sort of suggesting as part of this type of research by looking at the we call it the semantic similarity index. So the sort of taking all of the cloud of published understanding for a particular disease, plotting it in this, 768 dimensional space. There is the sort of mathematics that large language models use, and then seeing how connected they are to each other in this sort of semantic space. We find that, and we'll see that there's correlation between how well connected and how much information there is, and how much they advance, how much they benefit from neighboring sort of research. Hopefully I haven't lost you by now. I'm gonna, we looked, have you heard of this word, biobanks? Have you heard of the UK Biobank that's recently being a breach on the UK Biobank? Anyway, so the research that happens today, a lot of it is based on biobanks. What are biobanks? Biobanks are cohorts of individuals where you have in one single place different data sources related to the same individuals. You have the genomics, you have the proteomics, you have the metabolomics, you have the clinical history, you have, psychological questionnaires, you have, constant living, like your heart rate, all of the things that you can measure, your hair color, So all of this, as it happens, the UK Biobank is probably the most important one in the world because it has 500,000 individuals, and it has, last time I counted, 14,000 different fields that you can, different types of data that you can have for the patients, including things like MRI. So that kind of resource is driving our understanding of biology, because you can then identify for each of the different patients how different bits relate to each other based, for instance, on whatever questions you have, the environment, I don't know, do you exercise, you smoke? So the fact that you can relate to all of the individuals that are sort of homogeneously available in one resource allows you to have pretty much every single disease now has been one way or another represented in the UK Biobank. But guess what? The UK Biobank, which is a tremendous resource, okay? The UK Biobank is a reflection of the UK population. And guess what? 90% of the UK population is white Northern European. It's the origin. What they call it white British, right? But there are British, and guess what? That has implications because different ancestries are going to have, they're not necessarily going to have the same diagnosis treatments. We've seen it with pharmacogenomics, right? So we correlated the amount of information that is available for each of these data banks. So we actually analyzed 70 data banks, not just the UK Biobank. We also looked at the FinGen, which is the Finnish Biobank. We also looked at the All of Us, which is the US based. We also looked at the Qatar Biobank. We looked at 70, yeah? And guess what? Most of the biobanks are concentrating in the global north, which, by the way, it only represents around 20% of the global population. And guess what? All of these models are now being fed into AI. And guess what AI is very good at doing? AI is my 75,000 pounds sausage machine, right? It gives you the most sophisticated sausages in the world. It amplifies whatever you put in it.
But you would expect that anyway.
Sorry?
You would expect that anyway.
Yeah.
You got a global population of 8 billion.
Yeah.
The world is confined to the North and European areas. All the pharmaceutical companies, they make drugs based on disease and prevalence.
Yeah.
The African and Asian populations, they're poor.
Yeah.
They don't have the resources, they don't have the money
Yeah.
to survive. So they don't have the abilities to
Yeah.
create biobanks and infrastructures for
Yeah.
clouds and stuff. So obviously, when you feed in, you're gonna have poor data. So
Yes, but for the first time, we're able to actually measure what the impact is having with concrete data, with real statistics that we can then feed into whoever is trying to, evangelize about, we're being equal. Are you actually being equal? Are you actually, you know what I mean? You are absolutely right, but I think now I don't have the money to be able, but at least if we are able to pinpoint that, ladies and gentlemen, this is happening. If we are able to at least identify where the gaps are, identify the consequences, because nobody is really reporting what the consequences are. We see that actually less research produces fewer clinical trials. Fewer clinical trials produces less investment from pharmacy. We all knew that, but now we see that actually the whole biomedical infrastructure enterprise is rigged. We knew that, but now we can see with numbers. Look, this is amplifying. I call it a bias cascade amplification, and you feed that into your sausage machine. I'm not trying. I'm just giving you perhaps a perspective that may sound obvious, but I don't think the adding the AI perspective, I think is, from my perspective, I think it's novel, because I'm actually telling you, most people are going to be using ChatGPT. These diseases are more likely to hallucinate, and that's going to have implications, real implications on patients. That's my point. Okay. So we find, for instance, and yes, it's all about money, and it's about the infrastructure, and it's about, for instance, I was at you've heard of this thing called Genomics England? Right. So they are now starting a clinical trial with RNA vaccines with BioNTech. You know BioNTech? They did the vaccine for COVID with Pfizer. And they're going to do the clinical trials with Genomics England. Oh, okay, fantastic. And it's going to be new vaccines. So who's going to benefit the most then? If the population that you are using is not representative, right? And I know that they've appointed a director of health equity. I was supposed to get that job, but somebody else got it. And I'm still upset about that. Never mind.
Sorry, just on that one, the people benefiting, do you mean, because the people getting diagnosed within the UK with that specific cancer eligible for that trial, they the patients benefiting, or do you mean the study is the vaccine being created on the wrong populations?
No, I'm just saying that it's obviously going to benefit the UK population, which is not representative.
Yeah.
But even the minorities population, the people who are non-white British, because of what we see on the differences, as I said, the further you are genetically from the most visible population, the less likely the same treatment is going to work as accurately.
But those on the cancer vaccine trials, they are vaccines that are bespoke to that patient's neoantigen, neoantigen. So some of the trials are purely for that patient,
Yeah,
not the cancer as such.
true. But again, it's going to be, maybe you're right. Maybe it's okay for everyone. But what I'm saying is that if the knowledge doesn't take into account the circumstances around health, which in India are going to be very different from here.
True, but if it works, it can be rolled out. Like that, having the...
It could. But will you have certainty that it's going to work the same in Mumbai?
You have to trial it and change it.
You'll have to try, so it'll be delayed for them, won't it? A little bit, potentially.
Yes.
I'm not trying to convince you. So I'm just saying that, these are things that now, because we have all this data that we didn't have before, we can think about new ways in which, we are blind to discrimination, really, potentially.
So, it's my understanding, from you talk about vaccination and targeted population and how it's be.
Yeah.
So during COVID, we had basically very quickly we had vaccination come out, rolled out and everything. So, and it didn't work for most people. Always had very severe side effects for most people of the BAME community and stuff, if you know, because they did classify it, they didn't admit or take on patients from the Black Asian community. And they didn't do any operation with stuff, they postponed all of that. A lot of people got affected because the higher chances of them getting it. But at the same time, the COVID vaccinations also had adverse side effects for all these, but it wasn't reported. Or do you see the correlation in that? In that sense, like with a similar kind of thing, do you think it's because of what you're presenting?
Yeah, I think the COVID wasn't an emergency, wasn't it? So I think the circumstances are very different. But again,
But the data they used must have been from a certain groups of.
yeah, the ones that are most accessible.
Do you understand that it's a very small, very quick, minimum kind of
Yeah.
situation? But you're saying that, from my understanding, this is what's happening globally as well, like, you know.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just giving you, because that's a very different. Oh shoot, we've gone over the time. Sorry, guys. I'll try to finish maybe like in a few minutes time. Sorry to keep you.
Section afterwards as well.
It's been recorded.
No,
Please don't accuse me of anything. I'm just a humble researcher. Okay. So sorry to keep you guys. I completely lost track of. So I've mentioned this. We've seen, for instance, that with HIV and AIDS, at the very beginning in the 80s, when we look at the literature that was published initially, AIDS was very disconnected from the main body of knowledge. But as the more research was coming, we ended up finding that now things that are developed for similar, let's say immunology stuff, that they are much more transferable to AIDS, or HIV. So there is this idea that more knowledge, more connection leads to better transferability and better development of understanding, as well as the treatments and the diseases and the diagnosis. This is just to say this idea of the bias amplification cascade. So we have the data, right? And then the data then produces literature, and that literature then produces AI models, and those AI models produce output, and those outputs lead to clinical decisions, right? So if you have poor data, then you end up potentially with poor clinical decisions, right? So you have the data invisibility, the thing that we also call epistemic invisibility, which has to do with the knowledge around it. This sort of lack of connection with the main body, which leads to benefiting less. And they also have the infrastructure invisibility. All right, so who has access to the technology? That's also another bias that influences healthcare. I'm not going to go into this. So malaria, for instance, we have that it's one of the still most prevalent diseases that produce something called DALYs, disability adjusted life years. So DALYs is a way of measuring the amount of burden of disease that comes from the the World Health Organization. We find that even though malaria, for instance, has a huge amount of burden, the amount of genomics, for instance, around malaria is incredibly underrepresented compared to the amount of burden that it has, okay? This thing I was mentioning about these diseases, that somebody else in Silicon Valley is going to make the decisions as to what you should study, what you shouldn't. And we have that situation where, they are obviously well-meaning, but the technology goes so fast that by the time you then think about the ethics, something else has come up, and that's really so obsolete even. So how the acceleration of technology and the decisions that are made in the bleeding edge, you know, have tremendous consequences down the line, right? So yeah, I mean, I'm not pretending that this is necessarily a standard of truth. I'm just giving you a very, shall I say, modest view as a data scientist of what we find now by making these questions in this new Wild West that we are encountering. So what are the key takeaways that you want you to take? So the fact that it's not just that there's no money, there's no clinical trials. It's just that all of these things actually compound. So lack of money, lack of infrastructure, lack of clinical trials, lack of data. It's not like they sum, they actually compound, they actually make it exponentially, geometrically worse than just summing all of these issues. We also find that 9 of the 10 most neglected World Health Organization diseases, yeah, they are the most disconnected in terms of research output, in terms of the sort of language. It's more like all of the advancements happen for cancer, happen for, you know, maybe HIV, but then all of these diseases, leishmaniasis, you know, they keep like they used, the advancements don't transpire into those. Okay, I think that's an insight that I want to give you, that I'm able to suggest that is happening based on my research. And the other thing that I think is quite interesting, these biases, I've told you about this predictable hallucination. Yeah, the more disconnected the disease is to the global body of knowledge, the likely the hallucination. That pattern is consistent in the 6 LLMs, in the 6 ChatGPTs, different Anthropic, Geminis. That it's consistent. They all have that same issue, which kind of gives robustness to this conclusion or to this finding. And I'll leave it there. So thank you. I mean, it wasn't about genomics, but I hope this gave you something that you didn't expect, and hopefully it was useful.
These biases, would you say that they exist? It's definitions from.
Sorry, let me just finish this.